There are people who spend their entire lives chasing something: money, love, recognition, and even when they achieve it, the emptiness remains. They believe they need more, that something is missing, that they haven't arrived yet. But what few realize is that the true obstacle was never the world out there, but what they hold onto within. Attachment. That silent force that transforms life's flow into resistance, and abundance into scarcity. We live in a time when having is worth more than being. People define themselves by what they conquer, and lose themselves when something slips from their control. They seek techniques, affirm mantras, visualize wealth, but continue vibrating fear, continue holding onto what they should let go. And while they insist on maintaining control, the universe falls silent, waiting for the moment when they, finally, release. Detachment is not giving up. It's liberating what is trapped so the new can enter. It's understanding that abundance doesn't come when you force it, but when you allow it. The paradox is simple. The more you try to hold on, the more life escapes. The more you trust, the more everything comes to you. This is the principle that Itzhak Bentov called harmony of consciousness, the point where the human being stops resisting and begins to vibrate in tune with the whole. From there, the impossible becomes natural, the improbable manifests, and life, once dense and heavy, transforms into flow. In this video, the invitation is profound: to understand detachment not as renunciation, but as an act of spiritual power. It's about learning to let go without losing, to desire without depending, to live without imprisoning yourself. Because when the being frees itself from attachment, it becomes magnetic, not because it pursues, but because it vibrates. And if you feel you've been struggling too much, that the effort hasn't brought the expected results, perhaps you're ready to hear what the universe has been trying to show you for so long. Abundance is not conquered, it is allowed. And it all begins when you let go. When the human being finally understands the natural movement of life, they realize that everything flows better when there's no tension in their hands. The universe doesn't respond to force, but to harmony. Attachment, disguised as love, care, or ambition, is actually an invisible rope that binds the flow of abundance. Those who live trying to hold on to what they have, or desperately chase what they desire, end up creating resistance, and where there is resistance, flow ceases. Abundance is like breathing. It only happens when there's space to enter and exit. Many confuse detachment with indifference, as if letting go meant giving up. But detachment is not the absence of desire, it's the presence of consciousness. It's the understanding that nothing can truly be possessed, because everything that comes to us is merely a temporary experience, a passage. Money, love, recognition, everything moves within invisible laws. When the individual tries to dominate the rhythm of these laws, driven by fear or lack, they interfere with life's natural symphony. And the more force they apply, the more distant the result seems to be. The wise observe their own desire with serenity. They understand that wanting is merely an expression of the soul's movement, an invitation to evolve, not a prison. When the being acts with consciousness, they let the universe act. And the universe, in this state of permission, returns with generosity. Detachment is the art of walking in trust, without demanding that the ground always be firm, because true firmness is within, not outside. It's the capacity to desire intensely, but without transforming desire into dependency. There's a subtle difference between acting and struggling. Most people live struggling, believing that constant effort is the path to success. But this movement comes from a mind that fears loss, and fear is the opposite of abundance. The awakened being acts with presence, without haste, without anxiety, because they understand that everything that is theirs by resonance cannot be lost. Detachment, therefore, is a spiritual action. It's born from lucidity, not passivity. It's the strength of one who trusts the process so much they don't need to control every step. When the individual lets go, they don't lose, they create space. The universe abhors unproductive emptiness and immediately fills it with new possibilities. This is the dynamic of creation. Letting go is not pushing away what you desire, but allowing the desire to manifest in its highest form, without the filter of human anxiety. The detached being becomes a clean channel, capable of receiving the new without the weight of the old. It's at this point that the flow of abundance reveals itself. When control ceases, the miracle happens. And while many still struggle to understand this profound simplicity, a new vision begins to form within those who awaken. They begin to perceive that attachment is not born only from their conscious desires, but from something older, deeper, inscribed in the very biology of being. Attachment, before being a conscious choice, is an ancient inheritance, inscribed in the most primitive fibers of the human body. It begins in the senses, especially in vision, the portal through which the mind translates the world. From the first moment the gaze fixes on something, the brain constructs an illusion that what is seen can be possessed. It's a trick of biology, a mechanism that ensures the survival of the species, but imprisons the soul in a cycle of lack and endless seeking. The human gaze has been trained to identify what's missing. When it crosses a field, it doesn't perceive the whole. It seeks what's absent, what threatens, what needs to be conquered. This is how the primitive brain operates, a vigilant guardian of scarcity. And while this instinct governs, consciousness remains captive to appearances. The world is seen as something separate, something that needs to be grasped. This fragmented perception creates the foundation of all attachments, the illusion that there exists an I that needs to obtain something outside. Vision is the most dominating sense because it transforms energy into form. And the human being, accustomed to form, forgets that reality is much more vibrational than visual. They cling to the image, to matter, to what shines, and in doing so lose the invisible, the field where abundance truly dwells. When someone sees only lack, the universe responds by showing more lack. Because the gaze is not neutral, it is creative. Attention is the energy that fertilizes everything it touches. It's curious to notice how the same gaze that recognizes beauty also feeds greed. The same sense that connects us to art, nature, and love is also responsible for keeping us trapped in the illusion of possession. The difference lies in the consciousness that observes. When the gaze becomes conscious, it stops judging and begins to witness. And in that silent witnessing, the first step of detachment is born. Clean vision, without distortions, without the desire to imprison what is seen. Therefore, those who seek abundance need to re-educate their own gaze. It's not the world that needs to change, but the way one observes the world. What was scarcity becomes fertile ground, what was loss becomes movement, what was absence reveals itself as space. And this transmutation doesn't happen in the eyes, but in the consciousness that looks through them. Few realize that attachment, so condemned, is actually the echo of a sacred instinct, the same one that, in other times, kept life pulsing in caves and forests. This instinct still lives within every human being, waiting to be recognized and transformed. Because attachment is not a mistake, it's just an ancient way of protecting oneself. But when the being awakens, they realize that survival is no longer their destiny. It's the starting point for something greater, something born when the body ceases fear and the soul remembers who it is. From the first cry, the human being learns to depend. The newborn doesn't know they are a complete being. They only feel absence, cold, hunger, the touch that calms them. Life begins with a request, a call to be cared for. It's in this ancestral gesture that attachment forms, as a biological reflex of preservation. The body learns that to survive, one must hold, grasp, keep close what brings security. Thus, attachment is born innocent, natural, necessary. But over time, this instinct, which should be transitory, becomes a way of living. The being grows, the body matures, but the mind continues pleading for guarantees. It seeks in the other the lap that once calmed it, seeks in money the sensation of support, seeks in control the promise of stability. Biology, which once protected, now enslaves. The man who should walk free begins to drag invisible chains, believing that only what can be held is safe. Attachment, at this level, is just fear disguised as love. It says, "I need this to stay alive." And the universe, obedient to what the being emanates, responds by reinforcing the fear. The energy that vibrates in lack attracts more lack. It's a cycle of mental survival, where abundance becomes impossible, because the energetic field is too occupied trying to defend itself. While the being believes they must fight for everything they have, they remain trapped in the logic of scarcity. It's curious to realize that, even amid the evolution of consciousness, most people still live under the same biological code as the first humans. They continue reacting to life with the same instinct: fight or flight. When love threatens to leave, they fight. When money lacks, they flee. When destiny changes, they resist. All of this is survival, not creation. Those who live reacting to life have no space to co-create with it. Therefore, the path of detachment is not to deny biology, but to transcend it. The awakened being recognizes the instinct without being dominated by it. They embrace the fear, observe the impulse, but consciously choose not to act from it. This is true freedom, when consciousness takes the helm and instinct bows to spirit. The body stops commanding and begins to serve the expansion of the soul. The mind that once said, "I need this to live," begins to whisper, "I am life." And this shift in perception is the beginning of liberation from the cycle of survival. Because attachment is not the enemy, it's just the disguised teacher who teaches the value of trust. When the being understands this, they stop reacting and begin to observe. And in this new state, silent and lucid, something begins to reveal itself. The perception that the entire world reflects their level of consciousness, and that by changing the gaze, reality also changes. But there's a simple and powerful way to understand this lesson, a parable that reveals, in a profound way, how human beings live fighting over crumbs without noticing the immensity that surrounds them. Once, a sage observed a group of ants fighting over a piece of fallen leaf on the ground. They pushed each other, each trying to carry the biggest piece for themselves. The fight was intense, the effort tremendous. None of them seemed to notice that around them, the ground was covered with whole leaves, much larger, much fresher. The sage then understood. Human beings do the same. They spend their lives fighting over crumbs, without realizing they're surrounded by abundance. This is the parable of the ant, a mirror that shows human behavior toward life. Just like the ants, people concentrate so much on what they believe they need, they forget to look around. They limit themselves to the small slice of reality their senses reach and call this truth. They fight for relationships, for money, for recognition, as if there were scarcity in the universe. But scarcity is not in the world. It's in the mind that cannot see beyond its own need. Detachment is, in this context, an act of vision. It's raising the level of consciousness to the point of seeing the forest while everyone fights over the leaf. When the being rises, they realize that nothing needs to be conquered by force, because everything is already available in the field of existence. It's a matter of tuning, not dispute. What vibrates in harmony attracts itself, and what vibrates in fear distances itself. Thus, abundance was never the privilege of some, it has always been accessible to those willing to see it. While the majority continues trapped in the movement of ants, running, accumulating, defending, the awakened being withdraws in silence and observes. They understand that the universe doesn't reward the fastest, nor the strongest, but the most conscious. The one who understands that true power lies in letting go. The frantic effort, the fear of losing, the desire to guarantee, are symptoms of a narrow vision, limited to the physical plane. When the gaze expands, effort loses meaning, and flowing becomes natural. The sage who told this parable used to say that detachment is not ceasing to act, but ceasing to struggle. The difference lies in the origin of the action. Struggle is born from fear, conscious action is born from trust. When the being moves with faith in the flow, life responds synchronically, opening paths that effort would never open. Detachment is not the denial of matter, but liberation from the illusion of control over it. Thus, those who let go of the piece of leaf don't end up with nothing, they discover the forest. And when this perception happens, something changes profoundly within the individual. They begin to feel that life was never a battlefield, but a symphony in harmony with the whole. And it's at this point that consciousness expands even further, revealing a truth that few dare to understand. Detachment is, above all, a spiritual ascension, a call to see the world in its totality. The being who awakens from the dream of scarcity begins to realize that detachment is much more than an emotional practice. It's a state of consciousness. It's when the soul remembers that it doesn't belong only to matter, but is part of a cosmic organism, an intelligence that moves in perfect harmony. In ancient traditions, Greek, Christian, Oriental, detachment has always been seen as a spiritual ladder. Climbing it is not abandoning the world, but learning to see it from above, with the eyes of spirit. When the human being is trapped in the physical plane, everything they see is fragmented. They see themselves separated from things, from people, and from the universe itself. They live like a loose piece, trying to find meaning in a game they believe they don't control. But as they rise, they begin to perceive the invisible web that connects everything. In this holistic vision, there is no chance, no lack. There is a flow, a higher order that governs all movements. Detachment is the portal that allows entry into this state. The ancient philosophers called this anagogy, the ascent of the soul. The Christian mystics saw this movement as the return to the Father's house. In both visions, there's a common point: liberation from identification with the small self. Those who live trapped in desires, fears, and comparisons cannot see the totality, because their gaze is still conditioned to parts. Detachment dissolves this fog. It doesn't take the world from the individual, but takes the individual from the illusion of the world. When consciousness rises, the same scenario gains another meaning. What was once a problem reveals itself as process. What was lost shows itself as liberation. What was emptiness transforms into creative space. This is the spiritual vision, perceiving that everything happens in favor of expansion, never against it. The universe doesn't punish or reward, it responds. The energy the being emanates returns in resonance. Therefore, one who vibrates in peace cannot attract conflict. Detachment is, then, an act of faith in the invisible order of life. It's trusting that, even when something leaves, there's a greater purpose guiding the path. When the being surrenders to this wisdom, they stop seeking control and begin to cultivate presence. Abundance is no longer a distant goal, but a natural state. The gaze that once saw lack now sees completeness. The mind that once resisted now bows to the flow. And in this elevated state, the being realizes they no longer need to change circumstances to feel whole. They discover that true transformation happens within, and it's from this new vibration that the external world begins to reorganize itself. Reality begins to reflect what consciousness sustains, and detachment becomes the fertile soil of this creation. But there's an even deeper step on this path. Because it's not enough to understand abundance, one must make it part of one's very being. And this integration only happens when detachment stops being a concept and becomes living transformation. The path of detachment doesn't end when the individual lets go of what they have, but when they become the very flow of life. Most people believe they need to change their job, relationship, the place where they live, as if external reality were the cause of everything. But the wise understand that circumstances are not the origin, they are the reflection. The world that is seen is merely the projection of what the being believes themselves to be. And while they try to adjust the reflection without touching the source, they will continue trapped in the same cycle of frustration. True transformation happens when the individual turns inward and recognizes that what needs to change is not the scenario, but the level of consciousness observing it. Abundance doesn't come to those who seek it with anxiety, but to those who become compatible with it. Because the universe doesn't deliver what you want, it mirrors what you are. Detachment, therefore, is a process of refinement, removing the layers of fear, control, and beliefs that limit the flow of creative energy. Shedding these layers can be uncomfortable because the mind fears emptiness. It believes that losing control is the same as losing security. But the soul knows that this emptiness is not absence, it's space for the new to be born. The being who lets go of the old becomes an open field for the infinite. They understand that there's nothing to be conquered, only recognized. And in this silent recognition, something inverts. What was once seeking becomes attraction. The being stops chasing and begins to magnetize. This is the point where detachment reveals its true power. It's not a technique, it's a state of expansion. The mind wants results, but the spirit wants expression. When the individual aligns with their own essence, external reality reorganizes itself without effort. The new job emerges, love appears, health is restored, not because they sought them, but because they became receptive to the frequency of abundance. Those who try to save the little remain trapped in struggle, but those who let go rise. And upon rising, they realize there was never little, there was never lack, there was only a limited gaze. Detachment is the final act of trust between the being and the whole. It's when the human surrenders to the divine within and allows life to lead them without resistance. In this state, suffering ceases because struggle ends. Flow becomes natural, and abundance stops being a distant dream to become a way of existing. And, in the silence that comes after this understanding, the being smiles. Because they finally understand that they are not the little, they are the much. They are not what loses, they are what creates. And, in this instant of total surrender, they stop surviving and begin to truly live. And perhaps this is where the greatest mystery of consciousness reveals itself, inviting each one to discover for themselves the power that is born when one lets go and trusts. Abundance is not for those who accumulate, it's for those who trust. When you understand this, there is no more scarcity, no more struggle. There is only a natural state of fluidity. Money arrives, love happens, opportunities arise, because you become compatible with the flow of creation. Now the invitation is simple: practice. Observe yourself throughout the days. Notice when the fear of losing begins to command your decisions. And in that moment, choose to let go. Choose to trust. True power is not in controlling, but in allowing life to show you the way. And if this message touched something in you, if it awakened that feeling that there is a lighter and more conscious way to live, then subscribe to the channel, activate notifications, and continue walking with me on this journey of expansion. Here, every week, we explore together the mysteries of consciousness, spirituality, and the creative nature of being. Because life doesn't want to see you trapped in the little, it wants to see you flowing in the much. And it all begins when you let go.